Welcome back to the Passion in Motion podcast. It's me, your host, Mutsa, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Mr. Dan Freehling. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Dan, would you care to say hello to our fellow watchers and listeners out there and introduce yourself maybe and just, give them a little spiel about yourself before we get started with this very exciting episode today. So over to you.
Yeah, happy to, Mutsa. Thanks for having me on. And hi, everyone. So I'm Dan Freehling. I'm a leadership coach, a career coach. I'm the founder of the coaching and consulting practice Contempus Leadership. So just excited to be here and help out in whatever way I can.
Appreciate that, Dan. Appreciate that. Can you maybe give a bit more detail about what Contempus leadership is about? Like, what kind of what realms of things do you kind of deal with? Just if anyone's like more curious about finding out about your services.
Yeah, absolutely. So predominantly it's my coaching services. So it'll be executive coaching, leadership coaching, career coaching. Also do organizational consulting. So if there's organizational effectiveness, organizational development, leadership development programs, keynote speaking on career strategy and leadership, and then actually have a joint program with a guy named Spencer Campbell, who's a talent acquisition person who has his own reverse recruiting practice essentially, and we work together with job seekers on their searches as well.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, that's a full breadth of services. So if anyone needs that, Dan is your man. So this conversation, I wanted to talk about pivoting because again, in my previous episode where I speak with Janina, we speak about the current disruptions in international development, and we have a lot of people who now have to pivot in a time when they didn't expect it because everything kind of happened really, really quickly. And this is kind of an unprecedented time because, sometimes when you move on from one thing to the next, the industry is somewhat still alive. Like you can move from one company to the next company, but the work you do somewhat stays similar, but this is a situation in which the whole sector is essentially like almost pretty much destroyed, right? Like everything you used to do is that the opportunities for that are not as much. So this can feel like a very daunting time for people, especially those people that have spend a significant amount of their time working in this industry. Like, I'm talking about 10 plus years, 15 plus years. Pivoting can seem really scary. So this is a conversation that I thought you'd be a great person to have with, and kind of just like, how is that person supposed to then approach their next steps into, okay, I'm starting from ground zero. This is what I need to do. This is what I should look at. This is how I should, and just things like that. So that's kind of what I aim for the conversation to be centered around. So yeah. So anyway, I'll hand it over to you, and we can kind of just start from that point.
Yeah, it's so well put, and you're right. It's an unprecedented time in some ways, where you have a whole industry that is collapsing in a lot of ways, and it's tough to you can't really go to just the next company over. You have to rethink a lot of how you operate in your career, what kind of sector you're going for, all of this kind of stuff. It's really the modern adaptive job search is the way I like to think about it. And I mentioned Spencer because we've been working on a book concept up until now that's really come at a great time for people to be able to access some of these concepts in a way that's helpful for them. It helps them get grounded, helps them think strategically, helps them think ahead to what to do. And exactly to your point of what do I actually do next? How do I start this? How do I know what's next for me when I don't know what's next for me, essentially? Yeah. And what we've found is there's two concurrent processes that are happening in a job search. And it's partially why some of the job search advice out there seems so scattered and so contradictory a lot of the time. So one of them we call hunt like a hero. So this is the idea that, the job search is in part you facing a disruption to your life and your way of being and what you thought was going to be next. And it's how do you respond to that? How do you build your team, find people to help guide you through this, have these ups and downs and emotional roller coaster that comes into play here along the way, face your fears, figure out your strengths, leverage these to come out better the other side. And that's a very important part of the job search. All of this mindset, all of this paradigm, how you see the world. And so the world of traditional coaching.
Yeah.
And concurrently, there's this whole other side of the job search that we call apply like a scientist, which is there's very real best practices for an adaptive job search, and they're based in how recruiting operates, but also in how the process of discovery operates. And it's a lot of experimenting and refining along the way, and trying and failing and learning and growing and figuring out where there's a fit between what you want to do and what the market has available. So it's both of these. It's hunt like a hero and apply like a scientist, and they're both running concurrently. And it's something that's really important for people to understand, that there's this personal side to it, and there's this I'm basically a startup business going into a new kind of a market. And the personal side is so obviously personal, and
Yeah.
so much of like what you feel about it and what you want to bring to it, and so emotionally laden, and that's all really important. And then this apply like a scientist side has to be very scientific in that sense, so it has to be very experimental. You can't get too caught up in really getting hung up on all of the emotional roller coaster of it all. While you're doing that, you have to really treat it as a learning process, and it's being able to do both concurrently.
Yeah, I mean that second one is really difficult to not attach any feeling. Well, attach any emotion, kind of like apply, approach it like a scientist, because um, you're dealing with, I guess, a lot of pressures as well. Like, you really need to get something going because, hey, bills need to be paid, right? So that's maybe where, even me personally, I know that's an area I probably struggle with a lot. Like just saying, like, coming at it with the methodical, okay, this is just doing it that way. So do you find that most people lean towards more of the hunt like a hero as compared to the scientist one? Is that kind of what happens?
So it's a great question. It's honestly been about half and half from the folks
Okay.
I've talked to so far. So a lot of people want to get right into the job search process, right? And they just want to
Mm.
be looking at it, seeing what the results are, tailoring it, adjusting it along the way, and going. And they don't want to actually process that emotion along the way and understand that emotional mindset along the way.
Oh,
And then on the other side, you'll get a lot of people who that's much more natural to them,
yeah.
and there's a lot of feelings tied up in what kind of feedback am I getting from recruiters, and
Mm.
this process is broken and designed poorly, and I think it's a reflection of this company being against me or something like that, and all of this kind of stuff that's just not really helpful in the process, even though it
Yeah.
is broken in a lot of ways, even though it is really difficult in a lot of ways. But
Hmm.
being able to see through that and act strategically as well.
Yeah, and I feel like the job market these days is so convoluted with a lot of things. And one of the things that I struggle with, or like what I've struggled with is, you know, in terms of where you actually start your search. Some people say start on LinkedIn. Some will say Indeed. Some will say ZipRecruiter. There's so many other job platforms out there that it can also feel overwhelming. Like, okay, where can I be able to find something that aligns with what I'm good at or what I actually want to do? And where am I able to find the best success? Like, is it actually LinkedIn? Is it actually this? Is it actually that? So for those that struggle with that, what's a good place to start?
Yeah, so it's none of the above. So it's very counterintuitive for people. So the
Mm,
the place to start before anything is really within. So
okay.
we like to suggest starting with um, just obviously getting reset emotionally, and like there's real pain that comes from losing a job and being in the process and
Yeah.
taking enough time to be able to deal with that. First big thing is facing your fears. So we have an exercise called the 4 circles of career, and the idea here is that there's these underlying fears that are at play in a lot of our career making decisions. So one of them would be money, income, basically.
Hmm.
Another is image, so the kind of title and the type of organization that I'm working for, and all of this. Another one is on individuality, so wanting to have the environment that you want and the setup that you want. And there's these
Yeah.
underlying fears at play in each of these. So for money, there's a scarcity fear that's at play. for image, there's this need to want to impress people, to show other people that you're worthy and that you have value in this. For the individuality, there's this fear of even responsibility of going beyond yourself to something with impact, and it's all of these that are really tied up along the way, and it's important to recognize them and separate out your actual needs versus your wants, and then to run the search accordingly. So, for example, if income is the biggest fear you have in this process, it really behooves you to dig deep into that and actually see, what is my runway in this? How much financial cushion do I have? What do I do if I don't find a job in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or 5 months? And really running that out. For some people, that's very real, and that will be the kind of search that they need to run, is just to get any job quickly. For other people, they might have more of a runway than they think, and this kind of hurry up job search is actually not going to behoove them.
That makes sense. Yeah, just looking at what your cushion is like. So if we're saying, okay, you have maybe 3 or 4 months and you need to figure something out, is it just go for the first job you kind of see? Is it what are the steps that one has to work?
The practical steps, yeah.
Yeah, the practical steps in doing that.
Exactly, yeah. So this is where Apply Like a Scientist comes in. So the first main step of that is to come up with what we call your 3 fit hypotheses. So the reason we do 3 is because 1 is out of your control, right? I want to work for Deloitte or something, right? And if Deloitte doesn't want to hire you, then there's almost nothing you can do. It's out of your control. There's not much you can learn from in that, and your search is going to get stalled. Conversely, if you're very multi-talented and you're more of a generalist and there's 100 jobs you could conceivably do, it doesn't do you any good to be so scattered and be reactive and be waiting for any job you could possibly do and going for it. And the reason for that is that the job search is one of the last truly winner-take-all experiences in the world. And it's one where there's only going to be often one person who goes through the whole process and comes out the other end. And it's all about positioning yourself to be that person. And that means a lot of finding both what you want, but also where the market opportunity is and positioning yourself there. So just in really practical terms, this would mean coming up with an idea. It could be an inkling at first, but an idea of what are 3 particular job title and organization type combinations that I'm targeting. So this should really be your first step in this Apply Like a Scientist. So for a lot of people, this might be, okay, I've done some comms related work. I want to be a comms director at, let's say, a comms director at a foundation, for example, right? This could be one of your theories. It could be comms director at a tech company. It could be comms director at a hospitality company or something. It could be 3 different job titles as well. And then what you do is you then validate these. So your next step is not jumping on all the job boards and applying, but it's actually networking in order to get a sense of where you fall into this market and what this market looks like. So if you take the comms director at a, let's say a hospitality company, for example, your job would then be to talk to 5 people. So you go warm connection to warm connection to warm connection. And your only job here, it's totally non-transactional. So this is not the time to be, can you plug me in? Can I give you my CV? This is, I want to know everything there is to know about communications for hospitality companies in, let's say, the DMV area, right? So you would talk to 5 people who are in and around that exact space. Their advice is what's really valuable. And there's so much advice that people give from an armchair perspective that they don't really know that industry and is not really relevant for that industry. So you're basically asking all the questions you would have. Treat it like you're a journalist, treat it like you're a researcher, and ask away with, what companies are in this space? What are some that I might not have heard of? Which ones are growing? Which ones are hiring? What do they call this type of position? I think it's comms director. Is that right? Do they call it other things? What level do you think I should be coming in at based on what you know? Kind of what red flags do you have about my background? What stands out to you about my background? And asking all of these kind of questions here, and then finishing it with is there somebody else I can have this kind of a research conversation with? And that being your next step before you start applying. And what that does is it lets you then target all of your materials and target the jobs that you're searching for to be exactly for that particular hypothesis. And what you then do is basically apply using all of your best efforts to apply. So this is bringing in warm connections and all of that kind of stuff. You should be really focusing on trying to get a connection in, on 80% of jobs, let's say, and only 20% on cold applications. And then tracking your results by that hypothesis. So the idea is that you want to be able to see what your callback rate is, so the percentage of times you get a phone screen for a particular kind of a role. And around 10% in normal times is about on target for a callback rate. So that means that if you do 10, 20, 30 applications, you should start hearing back from one or two or three of them. And if you don't, then that means there's something off with the hypothesis. So either the market for that is flooded, or you don't have the right targeting into that, and there's more networking you have to do to figure out how to best refine where that fit is. Sometimes that means dropping it. Sometimes that means that you just tweak that. It might be that comms director really requires that industry's specific experience, and comms manager might be more where you're going in. And this is the process that you run for Apply Like a Scientist. So it's very much not reactive. It's very much not wait for jobs to become available on a job board and then completely tweak your resume with AI and apply to that one. It's the exact opposite. It's you're targeting, you're being proactive with it, and you're kind of waiting for that pitch like a baseball player.
That makes a lot of sense. So what you're talking about is more like informational interviews. Is that like the same thing? That
it's very similar, yeah. Okay. So the small tweak is that sometimes the informational interviews can be a little bit of a ploy to have a like a coffee chat with someone, and then you're really just trying to build a warm connection with them to eventually have them get you into a company. This is very much journalistic, very much research heavy, and the idea here is that it's an informational interview, but it's very much your goal is to get to the bottom of what this market looks like and where your fit is.
I see. Okay. And to do that, is it just as simple as let me go on LinkedIn and search up who works in this kind of industry and just reach out and be like, hey, do you have 20, 30 minutes? I want to learn more about this particular thing. And then if that person's available, you just set that up. Is it just as simple as that?
So our second and third degree connections are more than we think. And so what I recommend with people is to go with people you actually know and just say, who is a step closer to this than I am? So I might not know someone in the hospitality industry in DC. I might know somebody who is a step closer to that, right? So they might have been an event manager in the past and worked with a bunch of hotels. Go talk to that person and ask them about this, and then ask them, is there anyone who's a step closer? By 2 or 3 conversations, almost everyone is going to be able to get into almost any industry, so long as it's for a legitimate research kind of a conversation. Where the walls come up is when it becomes the kind of networking in disguise conversations.
Yeah, that does make sense. I would say, do you feel like doing that? Maybe someone might hear this and be like, this sounds like it takes a while. Is it one of those things where it might take a while, like, it might take some time in the beginning, but your results actually come by a lot quicker as compared to, let me just send out applications and let me just keep doing that because at least it's like actionable, right? Because I know that is that reactive versus maybe this is a bit more of like a planning, like, okay, let me actually sit down, think about through this. And to someone, it might feel like, okay, this is, this might take some time. I don't know if I have, I'm not sure. Is that like a common thing that might dissuade someone from doing that and rather just, okay, or do you find that it's better to do a combination of both? Like do that, but on the side, just send out applications and hopefully one of those two stick.
Yeah, so it's a really common question. Two things on it. One is there's a really common mistake people make of trying to feel productive rather than being productive. So
Mm,
the idea is I want to feel like I'm doing something, and doing something to me means pushing send on an application.
mm,
And that's not actually productive in this. This is a complex sale. You're basically making $100,000 plus sale in most cases, right?
yeah.
And that's not something you do just from shooting off random applications. This is something that takes real targeting. You have to again be the best positioned person applying for this, and to get into the process and then make it all the way through and then get a place to be willing to give you, close to or over $100,000 is a real ask, and the targeting is the real work here. And then the
Mm,
other thing I'd say on this is not a time limit. This is 5 conversations.
yeah.
So that can be in 2 weeks, that can be in 3 weeks. If you stretch these out, that can be in 6 months, right?
Yeah.
And if you really get on this and have these conversations and have that be the main part of your job for right now and track your productivity, if you're one of the kind of productivity oriented, goal oriented kind of people, your goal is to have 5 on this hypothesis before the gates open and you can start applying.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay. No, that's really helpful. Yeah, that is really helpful. So, in your coaching experience, so if someone comes to you and says, "Hey Dan, this is where I'm at and I need some help." What are the tools, or what do you actually do? Like what are the steps that you say, "Okay, this is where we begin," and kind of what's kind of like the journey that you can take someone through and help them out in their job search until their desired destination, let's say.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's all client driven. So it's going to really depend on what that person is wanting to do at any given time. I can make suggestions, but it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
up to them to say, okay, this is exactly what I want to be doing. This is where I want to be talking. On the kind of broad sweep of a job search journey, it would again start with generally that fear element, right? Of like what are you what fears are coming up for you in this, so that we can know which of these are actual needs, which of these are just wants,
Mm-hmm.
which would be nice to have, and then what kind of a search are we on? So is this like a really rapid search where you need to get anything, or are you going to be more selective, or are you going to take a longer time with this? So that's really the first one. The next is going into strengths. So this is something where it doesn't, it's not only about your gaps and what you're missing and what you're afraid of and all of that. It's really about what do you do uniquely well that you can leverage for this job. So this is
Mm-hmm.
something where a strengths finder is really helpful. We have an exercise called Power of My Strengths that we use with clients that goes into some of their career stories and is able to pull out strength stories from those, and that really feeds into really strong materials in terms of resume and cover letter and when you're interviewing and all of that.
Yeah.
Then it's getting into the apply like a scientist stuff. So it's the 3 hypotheses, and then the networking, validation networking, applying with the materials that are updated to reflect that kind of language, analyzing the results, and running that cycle over and over again until you start getting traction on a certain sector. So say you start getting 3, 4, 5 interviews for something and you put in 30 or 40 applications.
Yeah.
This is just, let's focus on this, right? Let's just really hum in on this. And then it's all of the kind of traditional job search stuff from there. So it's the interviews, and it's the negotiations, and it's signing the offer and going from there. But a lot of the work is really upfront, both on the personal side, so on that hunt like a hero side of your fears and your strengths, and then this apply like a scientist cycle, starting with that networking.
Okay. No, I love that. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, because I was just thinking about like those big questions that maybe someone needs to kind of work through first, and as you said, like just inner work that you think about. Okay, this is maybe what I'm trying to do. Maybe this is trying to work through some of those fears, and just be honest with yourself. Like, okay, what is it? This, because I don't know. I'd hope that I'm sure a lot of right now I know a lot of people are grieving, for example, like this
Yeah.
the death of this sector, and trying now to figure out what's transferable in your skills. Like, what can I transfer from international development work into maybe now you want to get into like technology side, like technology stuff. And it's like, I have no idea what technology is right now, like, or you don't really know because I mean, different things are happening and different changes have been happening in different industries. And if you've not been a part of them, it's hard to keep up. Right. So I think, yeah, those questions are important to kind of figure out, okay, what do I feel like is transferable? I know a lot of people will do like certificates, like, okay, let me do a certificate in this. Let me learn how to like write Java or like a
Yeah.
JavaScript type thing. Is that something you also like would recommend someone like, just upskilling yourself, going out there and like, okay, let me try to do this. Is that like a good direction that someone can take?
Yeah, so this is the validation networking again,
I
and
see. Okay.
it goes right back to that feeling productive versus being productive. So a lot of people will want to get the certificate because it feels like you're doing something,
Mm-hmm.
and you really don't know if that's even a nice to have thing in that sector, or if that's a requirement in that sector, or if that's completely non-beneficial in that. And what happens, and it's in typical times that's not the biggest deal. What happens now though is you're using your marginal time on something that may or may not help you with this search, and it may prolong
Mm.
your search if you're spending a lot of time getting a certificate or something. Similarly, if you're spending money on a certificate or a boot camp or something and you don't really know if it's going to help you,
Yeah.
that's something that's taking away from your runway and kind of
Mm.
shortening the time you have available to do a strategic search. So there's nothing wrong with these, but I would really do this networking up front so you know if these are a good investment.
Okay. No, that sounds good. And what about things like job fairs? Because I have my own thoughts about job fairs and these types of setups. I don't know if it's controversial or not, but sometimes I feel like they're not as useful because if you go to a job fair and they're like 2,000 people, 1,000 plus people at the same place, the likelihood that the person you speak to knows you, oh, I guess gets to like remember you, and then you send your thing, and then I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't really help, but I know a lot of people disagree with that. It's just that from my experience, from what I've seen, but I don't actually know, and so I know a lot of people might be looking towards those, like, okay, let me go to job fairs, let me go to this, let me go to that. It could be useful. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going to a job fair. All of this is just where is your marginal time best spent.
Mm-hmm.
And from my experience and from Spencer's experience, from our joint experience, it's really best spent on figuring out what you really are looking for next and then doing this networking so you can really home in on that fit. And those are the two big pieces that make all the difference in the world on this. If you have like a commodity kind of a skill set and they're hiring for it, that can be a place where a job fair could be good. I suspect most people in this sector are not in that position where you have something that is they're just hiring 500 people for this kind of a thing and they're just looking to fill these slots.
Yeah.
I think it's much more nuanced and unique and something where doing this kind of a process of finding your fit is really important.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. Yeah, especially for this sector. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Okay, so as we're kind of getting close to wrap up and stuff, and I'm sure just to tie in everything we're saying, what would be like your biggest advices to people in this situation right now? Like, let's say your top three things to tie in everything we said and maybe other things we
Yeah.
haven't talked about, but what will be your like top 3 to 5 things that you'd say, okay, this is my advice to those who are in this position, who are not sure what to do, who are still in the grief process of job, but then there's also the pressure of family, bills, life, all these, and I mean, all these things happening in the world today, right? The tariffs being increased, higher taxes for things, all these, there's so much happening like in the world right
Yeah.
now. So it's overwhelming for, even if you have a job, it's still an overwhelming time, right? So what would you
Absolutely.
say are like the top 3 to 5 pieces of advice that you could give to someone as like, okay, this is what you find useful and you could find useful for yourself?
Yeah, so I think the first one is all of that is so real, right? So give yourself grace, give yourself time to process this, to keep your routines and your If you have a wellness routine or anything like that, all of that stuff is really important to keep in up front. So don't sacrifice that to run this job search at full speed ahead. Still can run an effective job search and still make time to, eat the way you want to, and to work out how you want to, and to do any other kind of mindfulness stuff that you want to do, and to spend time with your family and all of that. So really prioritize that up front would be my first piece of advice. The next one is really, it sounds easier than it is, but really naming these three hypotheses. And that is much, much, much harder than people think it is, because it's getting specific on not letting yourself kind of gloss over it, getting really specific on three job titles, three types of organizations. And I'll say the private sector is not an organization. So a lot of people are, how do I adapt for the private sector?
Yeah.
It's so different. If you're adapting it for law firms, that's way different than big tech companies. It's way different than multinationals, and it's way different than local small businesses. And there's just, really getting specific on the type of job title, the type of organization is the next step. Then the third is keeping both of these in mind concurrently. So as you go through this, realizing that it's going to require personal transformation, personal change to go through this, and that it's something where you're going to have to try a bunch of times, and there's going to be a lot of seeming failure and setback along the way. And your task is to both have that personal transformation to keep your mindset in a healthy place and toward your longer term strategic outcome for this, and then also to take any failures along the way as learning and not as some sort of a personal failure, and keeping those both going concurrently. That's so important.
I love that. Yeah, yeah, that's definitely very, very helpful and good to think through. No, that's awesome. So if someone is hearing what you're saying, Dan, and they say, I would really love more one-on-one time with you. I'd really love more direction and to dive deeper into the things you're talking about. What ways can they find you, reach out to you, or like book these sessions? What's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so if they visit contempusleadership.com, so I've done 150 one-on-one pro bono sessions with folks so far, and I've decided to extend this on an ongoing basis. So they can go to the scheduling portal on there, book a one-on-one, actually pro bono session. I want to do this as a service back to the social sector at large, international development, but also nonprofits and other parts of the social sector. So people can book that with me one-on-one. Also, just follow me on LinkedIn. We're running a lot of events, and Spencer and I are doing a lot of work together on this. And then finally, we actually have a joint program where Spencer and I both work with candidates called the Impact Talent Agency. So this is when you'll get someone who's a social impact talent agent, a reverse recruiter in a lot of ways, combined with my coaching, and it's able to help people actually figure out what they want next and have the strategy in place, and then help with a lot of the really tangible, practical steps to get them there.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Well, and also when I post this on LinkedIn, I'll also just make sure to plug what I can, tag you for sure, so that people also
Sounds
have
great.
that easy access to you. And if they do have more questions or they'll love to have that one-on-one time with you, it's possible because, yeah, I do believe that you're offering an incredible service. And I do believe that people will benefit from just having someone to kind of walk them through these things, because it can feel like it's a lot, especially if you feel like directionless about a lot of things. Just having someone to kind of guide you through this can be easy. Last kind of
So,
question.
yeah.
Yeah, lastly, just want to know. So, in those 150 conversations that you've had, are there like any emerging themes or like any emerging like trends that you've seen from that, or like I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the big question throughout all of that, and there's so many different, everyone's such a different kind of situation for their
Yeah.
own desires of this job search. The big thing that's emerging is, how do I hold on to my values while I'm figuring out what's next? Right. So
Mm.
there's a values focus and a pragmatism. It's knowing that I need to be moving forward and figuring out what's next, but I don't want to give up so much of what I've valued in my work. And the big things with that are, looking at this emerging social sector. So what does the social sector look like? If what I sometimes people really loved their jobs and thought this was going to be their their main final job, and that's a really huge challenge to face, right? Is something
Yeah.
I've finally figured out what I wanted to do my whole life, and I was doing it, and now I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
So it's really, if you want to stay in the social sector, it's starting to look more broadly, places that are not household names that you've might not have heard of, and you do this through the networking. But it's looking at locally, it's looking at foundations that are not household names, it's looking at hospitals, it's looking at schools, it's looking at social enterprises, it's looking at purpose-driven private businesses of all kinds. And then some people are also looking, how do I switch into the private sector, but in a way that still allows me to uphold values that I care about.
Hmm.
And that's a similar challenge of really vetting the kind of place that you're looking to go, vetting the team, vetting your manager, and making sure you're getting into something where you can maintain what you stand for, maintain your values while acting pragmatically.
Okay, yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I mean, yeah, I know a lot of people do attach, like, there is value in the things that we do, and yeah, just if yeah, that's heartbreaking if this is like, oh, this is what I've always wanted to do, and it's been stripped away, and now it's like, man, starting from ground zero once again.
Yeah.
That would be challenging for anybody. So that makes a lot of sense. And so, no, thank you for sharing that, Dan. And yeah,
Sure.
I think we've gotten through a lot of helpful things. Yeah, this has been helpful just to kind of, hopefully, if someone's listening to this and they've been feeling the way we've, like, they've just needed something to hear and just like a starting place. I hope this has provided kind of that, at least just start. At least it's a start. It's, gives you ideas, maybe some tips on what to do, because yeah, I know the job search is very daunting. It's very, like we said, convoluted. There are a lot of changes happening in the world, and we need all the help we can get. And
Yeah.
yeah, so
It's so well said, but and this is a lot more directional than typical coaching would be, and I think this is for exactly that reason. I think a lot of people are looking for some really tangible next steps that they can do, and hopefully this helps them get started in that. And you're right, it's a much longer process. It's a deeply personal process. It's a really challenging process, but getting started and taking those steps forward is really key.
exactly. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate you coming on here. And yeah, so I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future. There's always new things to chat about, but I really appreciate you coming on the Passion in Motion podcast and giving us your your wealth of knowledge. I think it was really useful. I've learned a lot already from this conversation.
No, it's great to hear. I would love to come back on at any time, and thank you for having me, Betsu.
No problem. Thank you so much, Dan. And yeah, everyone, if you enjoyed this, there's gonna be more videos coming. So just keep a watch out. And yeah, if that's it from us. So catch you on the next episode. Thank you so much, everyone.